Welcome to the Natural Capital Podcast, produced as part of the Farm Advisory Service in association with the Scottish Government. I'm Harry Fisher, the host of the podcast, and over the course of this season, we'll be exploring topics related to Scottish natural capital, including what this means, its value to society and farmland, and the pressures and opportunities currently facing it. To do this, we speak to a wide range of people currently working and operating in this space, from farmers putting in the work on the ground, scientific institutes looking to put research into practice, and government and industry putting funding into action that can make the change. Today we're speaking to Alex Pirie, an agricultural consultant from SAC Consulting and host of Thrill of the Hill podcast, covering the Nature Friendly Farming Summit that recently took place in Edinburgh. So the Nature Friendly Farming Summit was held in Edinburgh last week on the 7th of October. This was at the Dynamic Earth. It was looking to bring together kind of farmers, policymakers, and environmental leaders. And it was the kind of purpose of the summit was, there was a host of talks throughout the day, kind of focusing on farmer experience, policy making, and the future of subsidies. But alongside that, there was a whole host of stalls, with different research institutes and other people working in this space. What did you make of the summit?
Overall, I think it was very, very good. A kind of gathering of the great and the good within the sector. I think that we had a good kind of cross section of multiple different kind of land users at the conference. A lot of really inspirational stories, a lot of really nice kind of innovative thinking, and a lot of representation from some groups that you wouldn't have automatically assumed were going to be there. So yeah, takeaway overarching kind of message, I think was broadly positive. I've really enjoyed it.
I think sometimes at these kind of conference, there's a worry there's too many kind of maybe government or policy makers and not enough people who are doing the work on the ground. But I thought there was, probably a majority of actual farmers at the conference, which was, and it's refreshing to hear them getting the chance to speak, whether it be questions or actually kind of presenting up the front.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the conference started off really strong as well with a good kind of mix of different farmers and crofters. So kind of certainly put your best foot forward and take it from there.
Yeah. So we'll just kind of walk through. The kind of point of this podcast, I'm hoping, is just to give, people maybe that weren't able to attend a chance to hear what was said, and maybe people that were there a kind of refresher on what was covered. And we'll just chat about each kind of section of it as and when we go. So it was kind of kicked off by Denise Walton, who was the chief executive of the Nature Friendly Farming Network for Scotland. And she was great. She was really good at kind of towing the line and saying that, putting that point across that farmers are environmental stewards. It's not the bad guys that maybe sometimes you can see on the media. And that nature friendly farming was a direction of travel, not really just a niche pocket of farming anymore. It's something that's going to be incorporated and hopefully within every sector of agriculture. But kind of made that point that profitability and nature recovery can go hand in hand, but it does need support.
Yeah, in terms of getting us kicked off with the conference, I think Denise did a fantastic job. Really great in terms of setting the scene on where we are in terms of nature conservation in Scotland, and where we need to get to. I also think that she did a really nice job. It maybe wasn't explicit, but it kind of got across the sense that nature friendly farming is very much a spectrum that you are on. It's not a destination point that we have to get to. It's a journey. So I thought that was really great to hear very early on in the conference.
Aye, and it was kind of echoed by Martin Lyons, who was on after. That was the Nature Friendly Farming Network chief executive, who I think is kind of standing down, if I'm right. I think this was kind of his last hurrah, and he's going to be kind of taking over. But yeah, he kind of echoed that point and kind of made the point as well that it has to be kind of focus on a farmer-led and peer learning and community-based challenges, and that this kind of transfer of information is going to be a lot better done if it is done encouraged farmer to farmer rather than kind of top down. If the benefits are there, they'll make themselves apparent very quickly. They just need to be facilitated. It was then David McCracken, who's kind of hosting the rest of the conference. I thought he did a grand job. He kind of set us off at the start, just setting the scene, as it were. So he gave quite a nice kind of talk about kind of highlighting the evidence of biodiversity declines, changes in climate within Scotland, and the role that nature-based solutions could have. But stress that point that while farmers are willing, there needs to be the government there to take away some of the risk from transitioning.
And Davey, very much a friend of the podcast, I'm assuming, Harry.
Oh,
You know you're in safe hands when Davey's talking and taking the lead of the day. And like you said, I think he did a great job setting the scene. He did a great job showing some of the challenges that we have in Scotland with regards to land use and where our most intensive activities are versus the more extensive. I think you've hit the nail on the head. Did a great job for setting us up for the rest of the day.
yeah, and we were kind of passed over to farmers on the ground after that. We'd got the overview of what the conference was about and the evidence of why it was needed. But then it was nice to hear from farmers who were, the ones putting the work in on the ground. And that was, so there's 4 farmers who spoke, from a range of different industries and different parts of the country. There's John Seed. He runs a poultry and arable farm in the Borders, and his work of implementing on-site renewables, as well as his kind of transition to regenerative agriculture with multi-species grass margins, his beetle banks, and his reduced chemical input, and how he's kind of embraced nature-friendly farming as a way of building resilience into his business, and boosting his profitability. As well as Cora Cooper, who's a kind of first-generation farmer and landowners who are running a hill and sheep farm in Ayrshire. And their emphasis on how they've made it work with kind of low inputs and regen grazing, and that kind of integrating of biodiversity, not from a kind of feels good perspective, but because this worked for our business, as well as Phil Knott and Ruth Ashton. Was there any of them that you kind of anything that really stuck out for you?
So for me, I think the 4 of them were absolutely brilliant in each in their own individual ways. But John Seed was by far and away my favorite speaker. I think he exemplified that kind of mixed unit, taking a very commercial approach and implementing change that worked for him. I think he did a terrific job of building in the notion of longevity and the family and the future. I think, you know, just a very comprehensive presentation from John, very much farmer friendly, very much looking at maintaining a commercial business. And for me, I know Cora quite well. She farms here in Ayrshire, doing a terrific job in LFA, quite challenging conditions. Phil's actually been on the podcast before, and he's again doing a very challenging job in a very challenging part of Skye. And then Ruth wasn't a farmer that I was familiar with at all, but again, really nice to hear her transition from commercial farming, which really wasn't working for her, to transition to this nature friendly approach. So yeah, 4 really good presentations.
Yeah, I thought that with again, I hadn't heard of Ruth's kind of story before, but it was interesting to hear that she kind of came to this nature-friendly farming through a place of it just wasn't working. Commercial farming just was not working, and it was kind of pushing her to kind of economically and mental breaking point of just trying to make it work. And it wasn't until she kind of scaled back and kind of went to a more low input system that she found that her business became a whole lot more resilient. And just with that, there was a whole host of benefits for biodiversity and carbon that seemed to come with it. No, it was really interesting to hear them speak, and give their perspectives. It was good to hear from the host of farmers, and get their perspective on it. John and Lee Seed have been on the podcast before on season 1. Everybody's welcome to go and listen to that if they want to hear a bit more about their kind of farming business and how it works. Once the kind of talks were done, we were given the opportunity to break out and go into the kind of area with the stalls, and there's a whole suite of stalls of different researchers and practitioners in this kind of space. Was there any of them that you found kind of particularly interesting?
Well, very much a friend of the podcast. Again, we had the opportunity to catch up with Rachel Smiley, who was representing the Forth River Trust, which was really nice. And we'll maybe talk a little bit about her presentation later on in the podcast. But always good to have a catch up with her. I took the opportunity to make my way over to the RSPB stand where I got the chance to have a quick chat with Andrew Midgley, which was really good. And also to stop by the Nature Scott stand and get an update on where they are with their biodiversity auditing app. So yeah, a lot of really great stands. I'm disappointed that I didn't get the chance to go around all of them, but like you say, it was a very fast paced day. There were a lot of breaks, but there was a lot of things on the move at the same time.
Yeah, yeah, it was nice. Yeah, nice to catch up with Rachel as well. Just kind of interviewed those guys, the Fourth Rivers Trust and the Lens, in a couple of podcasts back, and they were up later in the day talking about their Lens project, which was interesting. Quite a lot of kind of response and questions about that one, I think. But we'll cover that in a wee bit. And yeah, Andrew Midgley, he was up next. The next section was looking a bit more into kind of the future of the Scotland's agricultural budget. So yeah, it was kind of laying the groundwork of what does the government need to do and how do they need to support it in the agricultural reform to support this kind of nature friendly farming. Up first was Deborah Long from the Just Transition. She was kind of really re-emphasizing the point that nature and farming don't need to be two separate things. We need to be looking at embracing kind of nature, as it were, as a way of building resilient farms, and kind of stress the importance of this transition as an opportunity to grow. Um, and then we had Matt Griffin from Needpath Farm, again a farmer actually kind of giving a bit of evidence and how he's kind of built resilience into his farm through nature friendly farming. Was there anything that stuck out in those for you?
I think for me, Need Path was really nice to hear. Again, it was just compounding the message and building on this idea of here are the farmers who have tried the nature friendly farming approach, and it's really been worthwhile for them. Yes, there are elements of organic practices built in there. There are elements of regenerative agriculture built in there, and it's really about developing the strategy that works for you. But great to hear what they're doing.
hmm And then up after them was Professor Mary Brennan from the Scottish Food Commission, and she was talking about the National Good Food Plan. It was something that was a bit kind of new to me, to be honest. But it was interesting to hear this new kind of bill that's passed, looking to put a bit more power and duty on local constituencies, and really kind of seemed to be quite a forward thinking. She put it as wanting to kind of be leading in the world in food policy, and giving kind of local councils and constituencies a bit more kind of legal duty on good food, especially to kind of whether it be kind of local schools or any kind of public food distributor, really looking to kind of build in kind of more local resilience. Was there anything that stood out in her talk for you?
Well, for me, I think the big takeaway from this talk was that a number of our clients are still quite traditional, still firmly believe that their role as farmers is to promote food security for the nation. So I think her talk will really appeal to those farmers who aren't quite on the nature friendly farming track yet. I do think that it's an element of policy that a lot of farmers don't really think about. I mean, unless you're controlling your own supply chain and you've got some kind of distribution plan in place, I mean, a lot of produce leaves at the farm gate, and we go to the market, we take our checks, and we never really think about it again. So I think it was really nice to hear from her perspective of how the Good Food Nation it's essentially fits into nature friendly farming.
Yeah, and she was kind of pressed on that at one point. It was open to questions for the crowd, and somebody made the point. Wales have quite a good model of linking kind of schools to local food producers, and how do we adopt that? And she made the point that this is a real opportunity for the smallholders who maybe have a bit more kind of flexibility to meet local demands, and they have that kind of localness that they can meet these kind of shorter food chains to meet local demands for, say, be school. But then kind of made the point as well that we still do need our kind of larger fans to meet kind of national demand at scale.
I do feel that in general, the smallholders came out of the conference really well. There was a kind of general acceptance that funding needs to change to suit their production systems. There was an acknowledgement of the role of small units in nature-friendly farming. I think if you're a crofter or a small farmer in Scotland, you'll come out of that conference feeling very positive.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, that was a kind of point that was echoed by Jim Fairley kind of later in the day. We'll talk about that in a wee bit, but his kind of announcement of more funding for small holdings. Next up after her was Professor Wendy Brennan from the Rowett Institute, and that was, to me, quite a really interesting talk. It was all about hemp and all of its possibilities, and I've heard a lot of people kind of raving about hemp and that it can do wonders. But it was quite interesting to hear the research that had went behind it. A potential replacement for soya, a high protein crop that's carbon negative, good for soil. It kind of seemed like a win-win-win. What was your kind of thoughts on that?
Yeah, I have a complicated history with hemp as an agricultural crop. It's a crop that I've heard about, for 10 years now. People talking about hemp is going to be the next big thing, and I think the curse of the early adopter is that you sound like a bit of a lunatic for a little while until the science kind of catches you up. It was really refreshing to see her presentation and see the opportunities there for hemp. Like you say, that there are opportunities for it to replace soya. There are opportunities for carbon farming, good for soil, good source of protein. There was a lot of data behind it. It was really a great presentation, I thought.
hmm Yeah, and she'd won. It was kind of in the blurb of her description. It was scientist of the year. So it's obviously there's a bit of backing behind this, and it's one of those, maybe you hear a lot about it because it is such a great idea. It's just going to be one of these to get the ball rolling, and she mentioned that it's about getting the kind of marketplaces established and kind of streamlined so that this becomes a bit more viable. It's not people having to build their own market alongside a crop. It's very much let's get the markets in place for this, and it'll very soon, like, people will see the benefits of it.
I think to dovetail with what Davy McCracken was talking about earlier on in the podcast, there was a recognition of the constraints that Scotland's under. I mean, we only have so much arable land, so there will be challenges with where do we integrate hemp in as a crop? How viable is it as part of a rotation? And how do we increase uptake without disadvantaging these other really important crops in Scotland? But no, it's all for the good.
hmm Aye, and after that we had your man Andrew Midgley from the RSPB. He was up next, and he was kind of highlighting then Scotland's biodiversity policies and carbon and targets. Echoing the point that at the moment, our plans are to halt biodiversity declines by 2030 and get things back improving by 2045. But it was refreshing to hear somebody from the RSPB, really saying that to do this, we need farmers on side and working towards that. And, we often do, but the constraints are budget. Agriculture as a whole needs a bigger budget. I think he quoted, it's going to need kind of 1.4 to 1.8 billion for land managers to meet the ambitious targets that are in our biodiversity strategy. So he was really kind of echoing the point, we need to do this. We need farmers to be on board with this, and many farmers are, but they need the money there in place. And he kind of delved into a bit more about the tiered system and the new changes to the tiers. And he kind of put the kind of point forward that we maybe need more money from tier one going down to tier two, 3 and 4. What did you make of that?
Well, yes, that certainly was one of the discussion points. Look, if the budget cannot get bigger, there is a discussion about reallocation from tier one to tier two and three, as you say. For me, Andrew Midgley is a name that I've heard for a number of years, and I've never had the pleasure of meeting the guy. And it was really nice to hear what he had to say. I think he came out very farmer positive, and I really loved the fact that for him it was more about let's put pressure on to get a bigger agricultural budget. There was a recognition of the good that comes out of tier one, while also advocating quite passionately for tiers two and three. Um, there are some things that I wish we could have discussed with him. We were quite constrained with time. It was quite a quick turnaround. And maybe we'll talk about some of the questions that he was asked later on. But overall, I thought it was a really nice presentation. I thought he came across level-headed, fair-handed, and he really kind of complemented a lot of the other speakers that we're hearing from earlier on in the day.
He did indeed, yeah. Just thinking, do you maybe want to cover what the different tiers are, just for anybody listening who's maybe unsure when we're saying we need more money, diverted from tier one into tier two, three, four.
Sure. So tier one, if you think about it in four distinct blocks. So tier one is your basic payment. It is your foundational support that all farmers in Scotland will apply for. Currently, it takes the form of the basic payment scheme that's applied for through the single application form. Um, Tier two is being pitched as kind of voluntary land manager option type schemes that all farmers will be able to opt into. So those who are listening to the podcast who are maybe farming pre 2015 will be familiar with some of these land manager type options. And the idea is that we make these kind of options accessible to farmers and crofters throughout Scotland. Um, Going into tier three is your kind of competitive funding. So if you're a participant of the Agri Environment Climate Scheme, you will know that it's very much a competitive application round. There's very much a points based system to getting a successful application together. And the purpose of tier three is very much along those lines, that it's going to be quite targeted, it's going to be quite specialist, and hopefully quite high impact. And then tier four is very much knowledge transfer. It also serves as a bit of a catch-all. Scottish government wants some flexibility to adapt plans and to respond to topical issues as and when they develop. So tier four is your kind of catch-all. It also covers things like woodland planting and peatland restoration. So yeah, those are your kind of four tiers quite broadly.
Hmm. Yeah, and somebody had, kind of praised him slightly, and I thought he gave quite a good response to, somebody said, should this money in, like, say, tier three and EECS not be going to the smallholders who, it could help with building, EECS money, for example. They made the point a lot of this goes to NGO owned land, so owned and managed by the RSPB. Would this money not be better off going to smallholders and kind of, being used to deliver for biodiversity and carbon, but also as a way to make these small holdings more resilient? Could RSPB not be doing, more with, I don't know, their own money? But he made the point, we need to be in this together, arguing for a bigger pie rather than squabbling for the small slices. Let's work together and get a bit more money. To so that it doesn't need to be as competitive. It doesn't need to be, I get it and you don't. Which I thought was quite a nice way to respond to that. And we'll talk about it a bit more, but obviously, more money to do these things. It's either going to need to be more public money, or it's going to be delving into private finance, which was something that we'll talk a bit more about later with Lens, and this was a kind of option to go down this route, to get private money to deliver some of the outcomes that, say, EECS and different agri-environmental schemes were going to deliver. Somebody else kind of made the point, and he said it's probably one for a politician to answer, but it's definitely a good point. I think was that with the changes to the different tiered payments, and these becoming potentially slightly conditional. So, your tier one or tier two being conditional to improvements for biodiversity, or carbon. How do we account for the increase in cost in this? Which I thought was quite a nice point to bring up. If you're asking people to do more for the same, there's going to be more labor going into that. There's going to be more potential kind of actual costs going in to deliver this. It's going to need either more going in, or some other alternative. It's not going to be fair to ask to do more for the same. What did you make of that?
No, I thought it was a valid point. I think that Andrew dealt with it really well. Again, going back to this kind of acceptance that we need to see more money and more support there. But yeah, a very good point.
Mhm. And then following on from that, we had Jim Fairley, the MSP for Agriculture and Connectivity. He had quite a kind of whirlwind appearance. I think he was kind of in within 30 seconds and then up on stage. But he was kind of making the points, a reassurance that the government is committed to this and nature friendly farming and getting it right. He made the quote that I had jotted down, that the future is traditional, which I thought was you know quite a way of saying it. And that what they have in planned at the moment, that within the whole farm plan biodiversity audits, it is going to all be aligned with Scotland's biodiversity strategies. Was there anything in particular from Jim's speech that you took as a real takeaway?
Do you know, the future is traditional is a great line, and it's kind of reminiscent of a line that one of our former colleagues gave us. I think it might have even been said on a podcast, but it was something to the effect of, the farm of the future is the farm of 1950 with the technology of 2025. And yeah, there was a kind of a general acceptance that mixed units were the way to go broadly. And yeah, I really loved his reassurances that yes, the government is committed to getting it right. Um, there was, I mean, it's no secret that each of the devolved nations have taken a slightly different pathway in terms of how they support nature-friendly farming. I think Scotland has taken a cautious approach, but I think as we develop that science base, as we get more information, we receive more feedback from different sectors, we're going to come out with something that's really robust and here for a long time.
Hmm. And big news on EECS.
Yes, it really made my day. Let's not bury the lead. He committed the Scottish Government to another round of EECS funding in 2026, and also that it will continue through to 2030. So, you know me, Harry. I love the Agri Environment Climate Scheme. I was thrilled to hear that it was coming back and that it's going to be here for a little while yet. He did suggest that there were going to be some changes to it. I think that's only reasonable. You know, the Agri Environment Climate Scheme has been running for a number of years now. Um, there are some out there who feel that it's maybe starting to show its age a little bit and there could be improvements made to it. There were even some questions made in that regard, some concerns around capital support, for example. But overall, I think this is a good announcement. It's something that I welcome. I know a lot of farmers in Scotland will welcome. And just that kind of reassurance that, there's going to be that continuation of support as well.
Yeah, definitely. I think the fact that it's kind of extended to 2030 gives folk a bit more kind of room to plan around. He announced a kind of a host of funding for small holdings as well. Do you want to dive into that a little bit?
Well, for me, I think let's wait and see how these schemes develop. But I mean, you're right. There was again another acceptance from him that maybe the kind of area-based payments weren't working for small units. And he did announce a couple of different training initiatives. And correct me if I'm wrong. I think there was also an announcement about woodland planting. As well, which was good to see. But yeah, let's wait and see how they kind of develop over the next couple of months.
We'll put a full kind of suite of the announcement to funding that's came up into the show notes if anybody does want to have a look. After that, we kind of broke into a breakout and we're free to go around the stalls again. And when we came back, the next section was kind of largely focused around kind of landscape scale initiatives and organics. So the first up was Davy McKay from the Soils Association Scotland, and he was kind of given an overview about international lessons for organic action plans. He was kind of setting the scene for what does Scotland look like in regard to organic farms? How do we compare to other nations? And how do we potentially increase the number of organic farms that can adopt nature-friendly farming as not a way of accessing a premium price, but just as a way of adopting a kind of resilient farming method. And it was interesting to hear. I sometimes think Scotland seems to be doing okay. But it was interesting. He said Scotland was one of the lowest percentages of all European countries for kind of land cover and organic farms. Um, and it was interesting to hear about other kind of countries and how they go about adopting it. there's at the moment we've got the kind of conversion payments to organic, and he said, these work and these are good and these need to be continued, but some more kind of ambitious policy would really promote it. I think he said, countries like Netherlands have got quite a good way of kind of establishing a market for these organic farms to sell in, with different restaurants having a kind of scoring system on how much of their food is organic, and targets like 60% of the food in public kitchens needs to be organic, things like that, that basically have that established market as a driver for organic conversion as well. Was there anything that you took away from that one?
So for me, it was a bit disheartening actually, because at one point he showed a slide that showed the position of Scotland relative to other European countries with regards to the proportion of land that we have that's organically managed, and we are fairly, on the far end of the chart. But I think the messages are clear that organic farming is something that Scottish Government are very keen on. There's clear correlation between organic farming and nature friendly farming. And I think, David did a great job of kind of, again, setting the scene with where we are, where we would like to get to, and really kind of planting a couple of seeds of ideas for kind of innovative things that we can do over and above, the conversion payments or the maintenance payments that we currently get in Scotland. So again, another really nice presentation.
Hmm. And it was followed by the Lens up in the Forth Rivers Trust. So that was Tom Brown and Rachel Smiley. So Tom Brown from Lens and Rachel Smiley from the Forth Rivers Trust. We did a podcast on that just a couple of episodes back, if anybody wants to kind of listen to it in depth. But it was interesting to see again how it's progressed even since then, and how things are going. They were talking about their initiative of accessing private finance from local businesses. So I think they had kind of the local council, Diageo, and the kind of local Scottish water board to kind of get a big pot of money together that the farmers within the kind of catchment area could access to implement kind of methods to reduce pollution runoff or promote biodiversity on their land. So it was interesting. Yeah, it was good to see how they were, how it progressed even from speaking to them last time, and their kind of ambitions for the rest of Scotland. They were showing, I think it's quite a few sites they've got down in England now, but as well as that, over in Europe, they've got sites in kind of Poland and France and more countries. And their ambitions for Scotland, they were looking into potentially setting up a lens down in the borders, up in the Highlands, potentially in Ayrshire. Was there anything that stood out in that one for you?
Yeah, if I remember the presentation right, the idea that farmer producers out there in a correct cluster could achieve on average around about £160 per hectare for undertaking this lens project. I mean, for me, there is a prime example of where private funding can come in to support farming and provide essentially a second basic payment at that rate of funding. I don't see why we're not doing more of it in Scotland. Lens is something I've been familiar with for a couple of years now, and I do think that there are some areas that are absolutely crying out for that kind of collaborative approach. So absolutely, I was totally won over by Tom and Rachel.
Is that a soft launch for Lens, Aaron?
Oh, just you wait. Yep, it'll happen. Scotland's first lens island.
Yeah, yeah. Watch this space. Um, yeah, it was interesting. Like I say, we've got a podcast episode on that, kind of a couple back, if anybody wants to go and hear about the kind of nitty gritty details and how it all works. But no, interesting to hear. There's quite a lot of kind of speaking to people after it, a lot of kind of a bit of buzz about that one. I would say maybe more so. People not totally familiar with how it works, getting a better idea on what it actually involves. It seemed to be quite an engaging one. Um,
I think the challenge for Lens is just their exposure. Just get that message out there. Like, give the presentation that you did to a number of farmers. I'm sure, if you can get in front of these farm clusters and put forward your message, people will be responsive to that.
mhm. Aye, aye, I think that's it. Um, so then that was that section again. We broke out for another coffee and a bit of lunch. And when we came back, it was a panel discussion, sadly interrupted by a fire alarm. So that had us all outside Dynamic Earth waiting to get back inside, which was a bit of a shame. But from what was covered, it was an interesting panel. Just a bit gutted it couldn't go on for longer. That was chaired by Nikki Yoxel, who's the technical director of Pastures for Life, Grampian Grazers. And the panel included Annabelle Hamilton, who's a farmer and director of Agriscot, director of Borders Machinery Ring, and a writer for Farms Weekly. Doug Christie, who's Carbon Farmer of the Year in 2024, and David Mitchie, who's a senior policy manager in food and farming team. Was there any kind of key takeaways that you got from that panel session?
I think for me, the big thing with the panel session, it was very similar to the initial farmer presentations that we had at the very start. It just really reinforced and drove home that message that, there are individuals within the sector who are prepared to take the leap forward and really represent nature friendly farming better. For me as well, as the afternoon progressed, there was more and more discussion about how we get better at facilitating and providing technical advice. We talked about the tier funding earlier, but the Farm Advisory Service itself sits firmly within that tier 4 funding. So there was a bit of a discussion about, what we need to do moving forward into the future and how we best support farmers. There was also a little bit of a discussion on getting work-life balance correct and what the next generation of farmers are going to be like, and that perceptions of nature-friendly farming are maybe different across the kind of age brackets within farming. So yeah, some really nice messages to kind of round off the end of the afternoon. And you're right, the fire alarm, it was a bit of a shame. But it was nice to get out and about for a bit of fresh air and have a walk up and down the pavement, and it certainly didn't take the shine off the conference.
No, not at all. No, you're right enough. I thought Annabelle Hamilton's, the kind of questions that she answered were, I thought, yeah, very quite refreshing actually. She kind of, a next generation of farmers. Her father and parents farmed, but she was saying how she sees things changing as she takes kind of ownership and control of the farm. um she's kind of made the quote, she's not going to work for nothing and she's not going to work all of the time.
Yeah, so on that, I would describe her as passionate but pragmatic.
Mhm.
Yes, I want to make this work, but I'm not going to knock my pan in to get there. That this needs to be achievable. It needs to be realistic, and I need to have a quality of life as well.
And it was really like, rooted, her perspective was very rooted in, I need a profitable farm business. It's not, I'm not doing what she said, I'm not doing this for nothing. But I'm not going to farm just for the good of nature if it puts my farm under. She said, she admitted that this kind of conference was not something she would have attended, say, 5-10 years ago. But just with how she's assessed her business and what's going to work, she sees this in a kind of as a business sense, as a farm business sense. The kind of nature friendly farming, like you say, it's not one thing or another. It's a journey, it's a progress, it's a kind of a spectrum on how far you want to take that. But she sees it as a method of of a resilient business, which was quite a refreshing or new kind of perspective to take. Was there anything of Do Christie and David Mitchie's kind of answers to questions that stuck out to you?
Like I say, I think both of them did a terrific job. They both handled their questions very well. I just liked the kind of reinforcing of the messages from earlier on in the day. I mean, Doug did a terrific job. I think for me, one of my reflections from hearing him talk is that 10 years ago, carbon auditing was a really new thing that was out there that the industry was being asked to participate in, and we're really at the start of the nature friendly farming project or process, if you like. So I'm enthusiastic about where we're going, but we are very much at the start of that journey. Let's see where we are in 10 years time, and hopefully we have hit our 2030 targets, and hopefully we're well on our way to our 2045 targets.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, so yeah, that's a run through of the conference. I certainly enjoyed it. I thought talks were great. Good bunch of speakers, great stalls around. It was good to chat to some of the people that were there. I don't know if you want to give any final comments, Alec, or what was your kind of your main takeaways from the conference?
My main takeaway from the conference, I think, honestly, for me, was lens. I think we have to see more lens uptake across Scotland. I was totally bought in on the presentation, and the kind of really beneficial impact that we can have across the country. It's tailored, it's bespoke, it's industry led. I think it's, I have seen the light, and I hope more people do too.
Yeah, I think my kind of key takeaway was the kind of emphasis on the need of kind of government support, but the reassurance, from government that that is coming and it's being listened to and it's kind of being put forward as a real priority, and kind of the agricultural reform and what funding's going to look like in the future, um, and that kind of I think it was one of the farmers at the start made the point that while we need support from the government, I think the adoption of this is going to be based on kind of farmer to farmer. If it's a good idea, good ideas stick, and it's showing that and evidencing it. But just the government's kind of being there to take a bit of the risk, as some people do decide to transition in one way or another to more kind of, like we say, nature friendly farming methods. I'd say that's my takeaway.
I think just to give a bit of credit to Davy McCracken as well, he kind of rounded off the conference with what he referred to as his 6 Fs. And I don't know if you remember this, Harry, but he talked about the need for funding, for focus, for facilitation, for far reaching change, for flexibility, and for future ready skills. And I think across the conference, we kind of saw a little bit of that shine in every speech that we listened to. So yeah, I think the future's bright. I think that there's a hunger for new policy out there. There was also the message of like, let's not wait for policy forever. Let's get out there and do it and make it work. So yeah, some really good messages. Thoroughly looking forward to it next year, assuming it goes ahead. And yeah, let's get in there and get stuck in.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much for coming on to the podcast today, Alec. It was good to speak to you. And you can also catch Alec on his Thrill of the Hill podcast, produced as part of the Farm Advisory Service. Thanks for joining us on this episode of Natural Capital Podcast. If you want to find out more on anything we have discussed, you can find links in our show notes, and more information is available on the Farm Advisory Service website. You can listen to all previous episodes of Natural Capital Podcast and all other series produced for Fast Sounds, alongside a wide variety of other resources on the Fast Sounds page and Farm Advisory Service website. I've been your host, Harry Fisher, producer is Ian Boyd, executive producer Kerry Hammond and Kirsten Blackwood, and editor is Kieran Sim. This Natural Capital podcast is produced for Fast Sounds as part of the Farm Advisory Service in association with the Scottish Government.
The Farm Advisory Service podcast. Audio advice on livestock, crops and soils, environment, rural business, and more. Brought to you in association with the Scottish Government.